everybody, and thank you for coming to our 15th presentation. We started in 2005 with this program, and consecutively we've been sending students to laboratories since that time. So I first want to introduce to you Karen Glazer. And Karen Glazer actually was our very first student. She interns at the Soto Sonnenschein Laboratory at Tufts University School of Medicine. And she's going to say a few words. Come on.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Is this okay? Should I speak without?
With it.
So thank you for giving me the honor of speaking and speaking first tonight. 2005, 15 summers and 70 students ago, I had the honor of being the first student sent by the Great Neck Breast Cancer Coalition to do this new program that they first started, the Student Scientist Program. And I was reflecting on what to say to everyone here tonight, and so I think when we think about our high school education, it lays the foundation for being like book learned, but a lot of us are not familiar with what real experiences are like in a professional setting, and I think that's really one of the most amazing things about this program. I had little understanding as a high school student of how to apply science. I knew science well as a good student, but I didn't understand how it was applied out in the world. And one of the things that the research scientists said at the lab was that when you hire someone, you hire them for a minimum of 2 years. The first year is to learn where their pipettes are, and the second year is to actually make a difference in the lab. And I feel like that's what students really need. They need those experiences of learning where the pipettes are in the world. They need to learn how things work. Although not everyone will become a scientist, and although not all of us will become a doctor or an engineer or a politician, we're all involved. We all need to understand the realities of these professions, because although we're not all scientists, we all need to be able to delve into research literature and understand where that information comes from. And although we're not going to all be a doctor, a medical doctor, we have to deal with health and being medical advocates. So I'm now a teacher. I went to Cornell for 5 years. I became a science teacher. I teach my students how to understand scientific literature, how to approach it, that they don't need to understand every word in it in order to use it to empower them so that they understand something about what they're trying to learn. I use my science background to be a medical advocate for my 3 sons. Trying to get them the best care they can. Sometimes I feel like my entire education was for that. And also something I've been involved with the Breast Cancer Coalition throughout the years. I went with Laura to Albany, and we went also to Michigan for the National Breast Cancer Conference, Environmental Impact Conference, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. And one of the things I think that is very empowering is to understand how we partake. For instance, how the power of what we buy affects what is provided on the market for us. And that's actually something that I'm very much interested in now, in how we can drive change to live in a healthier world by choosing what we want to support, choosing what we want to purchase, and motivating people around us to do the same, and educating ourselves on what the next piece of research is suggesting. So thank you. Yes?
I remember hearing years ago that when you were working as a chemistry teacher, that there were chemicals in the school where you were working,
yes.
that because of your experience in this program, you knew how to...
Thank you for remembering that. Yes. You know, chemistry teachers have access to buying chemicals out of a booklet, basically a booklet. Some of them are so dangerous. I was teaching middle school in New York City, and the school was actually moving to another building. So it was my responsibility to open up these 30-year-old cabinets and take everything out. And I was horrified by what I saw, and I said, I don't think anyone should be responsible for handling this stuff. And we actually had to pay for a company to come and remove them safely. But more importantly, I think, well, that was important to do, but also teachers should really not be purchasing these things for 13-year-olds. 13-year-olds should not be exposed to anything dangerous, and most labs, middle school and high school labs, are not designed to be using chemicals, these certain types of chemicals, safely. So while we have access to it, I think a teacher needs to make wise decisions of what to allow into the classroom, because I'm so, you know, when you go into these, like in the Tufts lab, they take every precaution, but high school labs don't look like that. So thank you for, that was when I was fresh as a new teacher. Yeah, thank you.
So actually what motivated us to start this program was I was doing public speaking on environmental contaminants and breast cancer, and I went to the high schools, and the students looked at me like, we don't even know what you're talking about, and we don't have that background. So I told Lisa, and I told our board, I said, listen, I think it would be great if we start a program that we involve students, and I think Maria was the first one, Maria Rudman, from our board to say, you know, yes, let's do a scholarship. And we all convened, and we said, we've got money, let's go into the school, see if they'll do it. And Karen was our first student. So when that materialized, and she came back with another student, Leah Goldman, and they said it was fantastic, we just said, that's it. We're not stopping, we're going forward with this. So as Karen said, we have provided so far 70 internships since 2000.
So my name is Stella Rebecca, and this is my partner.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Lowe.
And our presentation is on endocrine disruptors and the Maryland reflections from a summer research program. So the GNBCC, or the Great Neck Breast Cancer Coalition, is an organization that advocates breast cancer prevention research. And under the Scientists and Scholars program, we had the opportunity to work in a university lab, specifically UMass Amherst, the Vandenberg lab. And during the 4 weeks in the lab, we got to learn essential research skills and the mouse Maryland, the endocrine disruptors, as well as breast cancer. So you're probably wondering, what is breast cancer? So a breast cancer is an abnormal growth or proliferation in breast cells, and it can spread to other organs such as the brain, the liver, and the bone tissue. And our connection is that the mammary gland is very dependent or very susceptible to hormones. So for example, estrogen influences the development of breast tissue. So if there's a high exposure to estrogen, it can influence the risk of having breast cancer.
So as you can see, based on this graph, from 1970 to 2005, the female breast cancer incidence increased all over the world. And if you specifically look at Long Island Great Neck, we are 15% to 49% above expected, which is a pretty high percentage. So if there is an increase in disease incidence, however, people's genetic expressions do not change. Therefore, there has to be an environmental factor that can lead to breast cancer. So what could be the causes of breast cancer? Now let me introduce you endocrine disrupting chemicals. They are chemicals or substances that affect the function of the endocrine system. They interfere with how hormones act, often by mimicking or blocking the actions of hormone in the body. Xenoestrogens are endocrine disruptors that mimic estrogen. We can find them in pharmaceutical drugs, personal care products, for example, sunscreens, body lotions, and also industrial chemicals. Therefore, most of us are being exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals in daily life. We believe that endocrine disrupting chemicals can influence the risk of breast cancer. We have several examples to support this statement. So in the past, people believe the more estrogens they have in their body, the healthier they will be. However, based on the data that we got, the results are completely different. So people who are exposed to DES, which is considered as a type of estrogen, have a higher risk of getting breast cancer than the people who are not exposed to DES. And also, like, people use pesticides to kill bugs or insects. DDT is considered as a type of pesticide. It also increased the breast cancer risk. And air pollution is also a factor that can lead to breast cancer. So in order to study how endocrine disrupting chemicals affect breast cancer, we use mouse as our model organism. So why do we use mouse as the model organism? First of all, they have a short gestation period, which means that it only takes them 20 days to reproduce. And we also have similar mammary gland structure, and they're easily to be exposed. The normal development is also well characterized, and the mouse predicted effects of endocrine disruptors later seen in people. So in order to study mouse mammary gland, we first have to understand the 5 stages of the development. The first stage is called the prepubertal stage. It is a sprout, and the second stage is called the pubertal stage. It becomes a seedling, and the third stage is the adulthood stage. It is a wintertime tree, which consists of mainly branches. And the next stage is called the pregnancy or lactation stage. It is a summertime tree with a lot of leaves. And the last stage is the involution stage. It is an autumnal tree with few leaves. So these are the 5 stages of the mouse mammary gland development.
So after learning about the 5 stages of the mammary gland, we also had to learn about the structures of the mammary gland. So as you can see here, this is a picture of a mouse mammary gland. So you see that huge purple, that circle over there? So that's called the lymph node. And you see those yellow lines over there? Those are tracing something called a TEB. And the overall blue lines show the total area of the mouse mammary gland. So some of the structures or measurements that we observed were the total area of the mammary gland and the total numbers of TEB3, the total average of the TEBs, and the ductal extension, meaning how far is the TEB from the lymph node.
So what did we study? We basically worked on 4 projects. The first one is the effect of early exposure to BBP on female mammary gland at puberty. The second one is the effect of early exposure to BBP on female mammary gland in adults. The third one is the effect of early exposure of BBP on male mammary gland. And the last one is the effect of early exposure to oxybenzone on the responsiveness of females to hormones.
So some of the chemicals that Rebecca mentioned, you're probably thinking, what is she talking about? So we observed 2 xenoestrogens. So one of them was butyrobenzyne phthalate, or BBP, and the other one was called oxybenzone. So BBP is normally found in commonly used plastics. and its purpose is to increase flexibility in these plastics. And oxybenzone is normally found in cosmetics such as sunscreen or lotion, and it is used to absorb UV rays. So one of the projects that we worked on was the effect of early exposure to BVP on female mammary gland at puberty. So the measurements that we observed were the total area of the mammary gland, the ductal extension, the average of all the TEBs, and the total number of TEBs. So the first picture on the very top is the control group, meaning it has the mice were not exposed to BVP, and the bottom picture shows mice exposed to BVP, and you can clearly see that the lymph node is much bigger in the BVP group, and that they have a much bigger total area of the mammary gland.
And the second project that we worked on is the effect of early exposure to BVP on female mammary gland in adults. So I basically did grid analysis of ducts, the terminal ends, and alveolar buds, and also the width measurements of the ducts. So the one on the top is the control group, and the one on the bottom is the mice that are being exposed to BVP. You can clearly compare these two graphs. You can see that the second one has a thinner ducts than the control group. Oh, and the third project that we worked on is the effect of early exposure to BVP on male mammary gland. I measured the number of trees, the area of trees, the number of branching points, and the number of TEBs. You can clearly see the one on the top is the control group, and the one on the bottom is the mice that are being exposed to BVP. And mice that are being exposed to BVP have a smaller trees, or like a smaller mammary glands than the control group.
So our final project that we worked on was the effect of early exposure to oxybenzone on the female response to hormones. So these two pictures are pictures of the mouse, the female uterus, and what I measured was the actual area of the uterus compared to comparing them to the different groups, and
And I measured the total area and the lamina propria, which is like the one in the middle, the white part, and also the myometrium, the lamina propria, the glandular epithelium. And I calculated all the proportions. So if you want to, yeah. So this part is the lumen area, and this is the total area that I measured. And this is the lamina propria. You can see the dark one. And the small little dots are the glandular epithelium. And the outer layer is the myometrium. So these studies suggest BVP and oxybenzone are endocrine disruptors that affect estrogen-sensitive organs. Female mice that are exposed to BVP have a larger mammary gland than the normal mice at puberty. And female mice that are exposed to BVP have thinner ducts than the normal mice in adulthood. Male mice that are exposed to BVP have a smaller mammary gland than the normal mice. Female mice exposed to oxybenzone have abnormal uterine responses to estrogen.
so after learning all this information, what can individuals do? So as individuals, we can be more aware of the harmful chemicals that we put in our body. So, and we can do this by, one, reading the labels of the products, seeing if there's any harmful chemicals present in the products. And two, we can use products that don't include endocrine disruptors. And three, we can spread more awareness to other people that aren't aware as we are. So, as a society, what should we do? So one, we should limit the use of plastics. We have to question ourselves. Do we really need this much plastic in our lives? And two, we should replace harmful chemicals in our products. And we should also find truly safe replacements that have the same properties, the same function, but with fewer risks and fewer endocrine disruptors. And 3, we should also spread more self-awareness so that we can improve as a community. So what has this research opportunity taught us? So 1, it has brought more awareness to the harmful chemicals that we are putting in our body. A product free from one endocrine disruptor does not mean it is free from all endocrine disruptors. And 2nd, we learned important research skills, including techniques used in the medical field, such as staining slides using hemotoxin eosin, which is a commonly used stain in the lab. 2, preparing whole mount samples and using different microscopes. And we also got to experience the college life for 4 weeks by making new friends, by dorming with each other, meeting new mentors, eating in dining halls, and organizing our own free time. So GMBCC, to the future GMBCC interns, it is an amazing opportunity. Not only do you get to learn more about your environment and the negative impact you have on the environment and how these impacts affect human health, you also get to develop new skills as a researcher, as a scientist, and as a human being. You also get to discover more about university life and grow as an individual. And finally, you get to make a change. Your research may not go in a scientific journal, but it does help researchers answer their questions. And you can also present your data on a scientific conference.
Summary. We studied the memory gland and endocrine disruptors in UMass Amherst Lindenberg lab, and we also observed and researched the effect of BBP and oxybenzone in mouse memory gland. And we found that both oxybenzone and BBP have endocrine disrupting properties. And we want to bring more awareness into endocrine disruptors. Our actions affect the environment and our future.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation, Stella and Rebecca. So Stella and Rebecca talked about some of the chemicals that affect the breast negatively and are endocrine disrupting chemicals. So after several years of sending students to biology labs, we thought it would be a good idea to send students to green chemistry labs. Green chemistry is a relatively new science that focuses on replacing some of these toxic chemicals that Rebecca and Stella spoke about with chemicals that are less toxic or may even be safe. So one of the labs that we started sending students to was the Richard Gross lab, first at NYU Polytech, and then Dr. Gross moved to RPI, which is where we now send students. So our first presenter from Dr. Gross's lab is Timothy Liu, who assisted in developing a safer polymer to be used for soft tissue engineering for the reconstruction of breast tissue after mastectomy. So Timothy?
My name is Timothy Liu, and my project, as was just introduced, is developing a safer biocompatible polymer for tissue engineering, which shows potential for breast reconstruction. So tissue engineering is the growth of new engineered tissue in labs, and these tissues can replace, restore, or regenerate defective tissue. They require stem cells, a scaffold, and biological factors that influence the cells to grow. In my project, I created a new scaffold. So what are these scaffolds? They mimic the extracellular matrix of cells, which help physically support these cells in place. They facilitate intercellular, between cell, and interact with the cell. They are biodegradable and must be non-toxic and be able to be flushed from the body. This allows for the body to actually replace the scaffold with its own extracellular matrix. And these scaffolds also give mechanical properties of the tissue. So in my project, I used PGS, polyglycerol sebacate. It was first synthesized by the Wang lab in, I think, MIT. And it's this biodegradable and biocompatible elastic polymer. And so because of its biodegradability and biocompatibility, it can be used in biomedical applications. and its elastic properties allow for it to be used in soft tissue engineering. Soft tissues are basically most cells that aren't bone and enamel, like skin, epithelial tissue, and these monomers, which make up the polymer, glycerol and sebacic acid, are non-toxic, FDA approved for a variety of applications, and a good thing for scalability is that they're very cheap and easily producible. They're found in the body. Glycerol is a big component of many lipids in the body, they're called glycerides, and sebacic acid is this intermediate of metabolism of fatty acids. PGS also, the mechanical properties of PGS can be changed with molar ratio of monomers and etc. This allows for the modification to match tissue elasticity and therefore match certain tissues. So the problem was we needed to develop a cheaper, safer, non-toxic, and biodegradable scaffolds. In order to, these scaffolds would be able to create tissue, like new breast tissue after mastectomy. The danger with current textured breast implants is that they can actually cause cancer. It's a form of lymphoma, which is a reason why these textured breast implants are kind of dangerous. Additionally, creating a scaffold can possibly allow for, instead of a fake breast, but actually for it to fully function again. Additionally, the tissue engineering can allow for research of cancers in a more native environment, as the elasticity of tissue, the surrounding tissue, and biological factors can actually influence the growth of cancer. So the most common breast cancers are carcinomas, which are the soft glandular tissue, and there's also a soft adipose tissue, fat tissue environment around it. Therefore, using specific elasticity of PGS, we can match these tissues and actually create a very good microenvironment for research. So for this project, I wanted to apply these green chemistry principles to ease the harsh synthesis reaction. We used this enzyme catalyst, Novozyme 435. We also wanted to alter the molecular weight, which is the average molecule size, by adding this compound, or this molecule called 1,8-octane diol, and this would obviously increase the molecular weight, but the molecular weight influences thermal properties, mechanical properties, which is the reaction of the polymer to force, and that's like tensile strength and toughness. And we also wanted to have the ability to electrospin fibers. These fibers are the thing that form a scaffold that's very strong. These are nanofibers that are similar to collagen, which is in the extracellular matrix. And the electrospinning also allows for further manipulation. So this synthesis procedure, because of the enzyme, actually was able to, we were able to reduce the temperature and elongate the reaction to allow for an even greater molecular weight. As you can see, we used glycerol, octane diol, and sebacic acid, and we used a parallel reactor. So we measured the molecular weight using gel permeation chromatography, which is dissolving the polymer in solution and running that solution through a gel. And by measuring the amount of time that the weight of by measuring the amount of time that each molecule comes out, you can actually measure the molecular weight. So on this graph you have Mn, which is the number average molecular weight, which is just adding up all the numbers and dividing it by an amount. And we also have the weight average molecular weight, which is just the weight average, kind of like, well, what is the weight? yeah, but you can, the weighted average molecular weight actually is a better picture. But as you can see, there's actually a significantly different weight average molecular weight between the ratio, POGS, which is the polymer developed, in ratios of 1 to 1 to 2 of glycerol octanediol and sebacic acid, and 1 to 4 to 5, and also between 1 to 3 to 4 and 1 to 4 to 5. For comparison, as you can see, the weighted average molecular weight of 134 is very, very, very high, and also with 112, it's 80,000, basically atomic mass units, which is the amount of protons basically measured as compared to carbon-12. But for comparison, pure PGS synthesized is actually only 1,100 atomic mass units. So this is just 80 times greater, which is pretty amazing. We also measured the melting and crystallization temperatures. This is useful because in the body you don't want PGS to be a liquid, obviously, because then it can't hold its shape. So with increasing ratios of octanediol, both melting and crystallization temperatures increased. For comparison, the crystallization temperature and melting temperature of PGS, the regular polymer, the crystallization temperature is negative 18 degrees, and the melting temperature is barely 10 degrees. So we increased these a lot, and now they're definitely going to be solid in the human body. I also measured the using NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. This confirmed the structure of the polymer, and if we could, it's just exactly the same as PGS, but it has this octanediol, which we confirmed the presence of octanediol and showed that the procedure actually worked. We also tried to electrospin the polymer with the highest molecular weight. And you can see that on this aluminum foil sheet, the white is the polymer. However, you can't see visible fibers with a naked eye. And in my time there, I was not able to do scanning electron microscopy. So that's unfortunate, but I am planning to go back at the end of this month to help finish up with some of this data collection. So although 1 to 3 to 4 POGS was unable to be electrospun, there are many variables that we could have changed to actually get fibers, which shows promise because these thermal properties, the thermal properties and the molecular weight show that a much higher improvement. However, although I couldn't directly measure the mechanical properties, as I would need a different machine and another synthesis reaction, the amount of, the molecular weight. So theoretically, these should be a lot tougher. So we see that the method here is effective in synthesizing this POGS with adjustable molecular weight. All you have to do is edit the amount of octanediol. And these POGS scaffolds really show potential in breast soft tissue engineering for replacement of breast tissue after mastectomy. So I would like to acknowledge Professor Richard Gross, obviously, my mentor Kenny Lam, Somdata Bhattacharya, who helped with the electrospinning, and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and obviously the GNPCC for this amazing experience.
Are there questions for Timothy this morning?
Your technical understanding is amazing.
Thank you.
Awesome. Very.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
How soon do you think that this breast tissue engineering, like what was the word around the lab about when this may actually come to pass?
Well, so first of all, there is this technique that people are trying to do now, which is pretty similar actually for replacement of breast tissue after mastectomy, which is called an acellular dermal matrix, which basically is an extracellular matrix which has which tries to remove all the cells from it and therefore be used as basically a scaffold. However, this can actually lead to immune reactions as it's from a different human being, and that's pretty difficult. So what we'd have to do is further improve the mechanical properties to exactly match any tissue, and then do some cell work to ensure that it's to basically see exactly how it interacts with the scaffold, because although it is definitely biocompatible, there are some things that actually do matter, like bioactivity, and you would need to maybe implant some proteins or change the surface topography of the material, which is pretty insane. People are pretty optimistic in the lab because we're really getting someplace. This polymer has only been was discovered in 2002, but there are already a lot of applications. The global market is in the millions for this material. It's been used in papers for like cardiac patches, a lot of soft tissue engineering, and even actually hard tissue engineering, where they're able to adjust the mechanical properties to match a bone, which is interesting because this is an elastic polymer, but bone is very hard.
Thank you. It's great.
Organic may not be 100% accurate. So what a lot of these seals are only given, and usually they're independent, and they're given to cosmetic products and cosmetic companies that have proved that they are made with usually organic ingredients. So the second one, it's given to those companies who make their products with either renewable resources or they use less resources, such as less water. The third is also given to cosmetic companies to prove that they have made their products with usually most of them being organic. And the fourth one is also given to companies that made products with 95% of their cosmetics being natural and not containing any of these four ingredients. So, and just a little note, I would like to acknowledge the people at Columbia Mailman School of Public Health who helped me, especially Dr. Mary Beth Terry and her entire group, and also Great Lake Breast Cancer Coalition for giving me this opportunity and seeing me that science is not just pipetting in a lab or wearing goggles or measuring whatever you're measuring. It's also about research, it's about going on the public, conducting public surveys, and it's just more than that.
Thank you so much for sharing that really practical information, really useful. So I want to say a little bit about our final speaker, Raymond Lynn, who also went to Dr. Richard Gross's lab. This is Raymond's second summer that he was at the lab, and it's sort of a family affair because his brother went to the lab several years ago, his brother Lawrence, and John Lynn, his father, has come twice with us to a breast cancer conference. We've taken many of our students to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences Breast Cancer and Environment Conference in November, and we're going again this November. Unfortunately, it's the last time the federal government is cut off funding for this conference. But Laura and I have been chaperoning these students for many years, and we have had the honor of being joined by John Lynn twice now. So maybe a third time, John. What? Yes, we're going to Atlanta, Georgia, so maybe you'll come with us. So, and the amazing thing about the students at the conference is that they send in an abstract, And every time we've had a student send in an abstract, it has been accepted, and those students then create a poster presentation of the research that they did, that they present at the conference. And they're presenting to doctoral students and researchers and postdocs and, you know, those who, sometimes people walk up to them and say, you know, where are you studying for your doctorate? And they're like, no, I'm a high school student. So it's been a really amazing experience to go with these students. So now I'm going to introduce Raymond. As I said, he studied at Dr. Gross's lab for the second summer, developed non-toxic food packaging, which eliminates toxins linked to breast cancer.
PGA emulsions is on the x-axis. And as you can see over here, we see two major conclusions. First of all, the 1% oils tended to have lower average droplet sizes, and that's what we're looking for in terms of stability. We want more stability with lower average droplet sizes and slower release rates of the oil. We don't want them to leak as much. And we see that increasing the oil concentration, generally in most cases, led to an increase in the droplet sizes, more instability, which was consistent with my research from last year. And something also important to note is that 5% oregano oil and 10% oregano oil, when compared with their comparable oil systems, say if you look at 5% oregano with 5% thyme and 5% lemon, you see that 5% oregano oil actually maintains a lower average droplet size, which is great. That indicates that oregano oil is actually functioning better than the other essential oils inside of the systems. So that's one parameter down. Another one to look at is whether or not the chitosan emulsions were actually functioning within the systems, whether or not they were producing functional films. I mentioned previously that we had either pure chitosan bottom layers or chitosan emulsion bottom layers. Well, here's where they come into play. On the left side over there, you can see the water solubility graph of pure low molecular weight bottom layers compared to low molecular weight chitosan bottom layers compared to chitosan emulsion bottom layers on the right side. And you see that the water solubility actually decreases. And that may tell us that the chitosan emulsions may be better than the pure systems. But there's more to look at, there's more data to look at. We see over here that it actually increases the thickness, which is not what we want in terms of introducing the emulsion systems, because we want, for a more potent film, we want a thinner film. We don't want the film thickness to increase as a result of introducing the emulsion. And another reason why the chitosan emulsions don't look as good as they seem is that if you look over here on the bottom, you have a picture of one of the attempts at making a film. And as you can see, it's not a very good film. It's a hydrogel, actually. It's formed with a 10% oregano oil chitosan emulsion on the bottom layer and a 10% oregano oil GAO-PGA emulsion on the top layer. And because of this, because some of the chitosan emulsions actually form hydrogels, actually form systems that weren't very viable, and also because of the chitosan emulsions making the thickness increase for many of the film systems, we said that the emulsions weren't very effective in terms of stabilizing the films. So we won't be pursuing them further. Now if we look at the physical integrity of the other films. Now we're looking at films with pure GAO-PGA bottom layers and GAO-PGA emulsion top layers, or pure we're looking at chitosan bottom layers, sorry I misspoke, and we're looking at a GAO-PGA top layer with either pure solutions or emulsions. Now, something important to note here is that as you increase the oil concentrations, and you can see the labels on the top and bottom, with increased oil concentrations of 10% systems over here, these films begin to leak out the oils, and that's more or less expected because of the emulsions that we're using. As I said, the greater oil concentrations have been shown to increase droplet size, increase the instability. However, that's important to note because in the antimicrobial tests, these films aren't actually as effective as they would appear with the greater oil concentrations. We don't want to trade stability for more antimicrobial capabilities. And as you can see, these last three films are very unstable, whereas the next films over here are slightly more stable, with 5% oregano oil and 5% lemon oil with exhibiting fewer deformations. Now onto the DMA tests. This is just a basic graph of the DMA data that we found. Just a reminder, we're looking for ultimate tensile strength, which is the maximum stress, the elongation at break, which is the maximum strain, and the Young's modulus, which is that last portion over there, in terms of the slope of the first portion over there. Now, when comparing each of the film systems, we saw that 1% gamma PGA pure systems, systems with pure chitosan bottom layers and pure gamma PGA top layers, they're actually having rather high ultimate tensile strengths, if you see on the left side over here. However, when you add in the oils, they start to increase the ultimate tensile strength in terms of when compared to the phospholipid butyl ester systems. And you see that 5% oregano oil over there actually has the second best ultimate tensile strength, which means that it's the second best for not deforming, not kind of failing under stress. And that indicates that the oregano oil, at least 5% systems, was functioning in terms of creating a more mechanically viable film. If you look over here, we have the elongation and break. This basically measures how much you can stretch the films before they start to deform and before they start to fail. And as you can see, the 5% oregano oil still remains competitive. 5% level antimicrobial food packaging film that can be created with sustainable materials. And this was all done with the support and guidance of the Great Neck Breast Cancer Coalition. So basically what I did was develop a bilayer emulsion composition in order to develop a bilayer film. And don't worry if none of that makes sense right now, I'll explain more in a bit. But first, let's talk about why people need food packaging films in the first place. Well, in the most fundamental understanding of it is that food packaging films are essentially used to prevent microbial or oxidative spoilage. Either they prevent the microbes from growing on the food or they prevent them from getting to the food. Synthetic preservatives have been previously used, such as benzoates, sulfites, sorbates, in order to prevent microbial spoilage by preventing the microbes from growing. However, numerous previous studies have found that these chemicals are linked to breast cancer and other forms of allergic reactions. Another method would be to use a food packaging material in order to surround the food, in order to prevent any of the microbes, such as fungus or a bacteria, from reaching their targets. However, previous studies have also found that there's another set of concerns with using a food packaging material like that. Previous studies have found that BPA and PFOA, common plasticizers which are used to create these food packaging plastics, have been linked to breast cancer. To circumvent this, we need to look at a different form of food packaging, a food packaging film. Previous studies have utilized food packaging films in order to prevent microbial spoilage with non-toxic materials. One study utilized a protein whey isolate film with oregano oil in order to completely inhibit the growth of lactic acid bacteria on beef. Another study used chitosan with lemon essential oils in order to prevent the growth of a fungus on strawberries in order to prevent fungal decay. Now, these studies are a proof of concept. They show that non-toxic materials can be used in antimicrobial films, and they can be used effectively. The only downside to many of these films is that they use monolayer films, they use single-layer films. And inherently, they're limited in how many materials, how many components they can incorporate into these films. Now, what I intended to study was the use of bilayer films. They're more applicable in real everyday applications because monolayer films can only block, say for example, a fungus, whereas a gram-negative bacteria will roam on in and then spoil the food. A bilayer film is capable of having a more broad range of antimicrobial capabilities and able to block a fungus, a gram-negative bacteria, or a gram-positive bacteria if needed with the correct components. And that's what I intended to study. The overall research goals of my study was to investigate the use of a bilayer film with essential oils, biosurfactants, and hydrophilic polymers in order to create an antimicrobial film. Now, if you want to imagine a bilayer film, imagine essentially a solution that's dried first with one layer and then dried with a second layer on top after the first layer is completely dry. A monolayer film would have been created with both of the homogeneous solution dried at the exact same time, and that actually limits the amount of stuff you can actually put in there to keep it stable. And the main point of this project is to avoid using chemicals such as BPA and PFOA, which have been linked to breast cancer, in preventing food spoilage. Now I want to introduce you to the foundation of these bilayer films. In order to create a bilayer film, we need to have two chemicals that are able to physically cross-link and form ionic interactions with each other. And these are gamma-polyglutamic acid and chitosan. And gamma-polyglutamic acid is also known as gamma-PGA. Now, these chemicals have the added benefit of having previously been shown to have antimicrobial capabilities, which is a bonus. And they have capabilities to block the growth of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. They've also been shown to be able to form ionic interactions with each other for the creation of films, and that's why we're using them. Essentially what you can imagine is the use of a chitosan bottom layer and a gamma PGA top layer that can physically interact, stabilize each other, and form a cohesive film. For greater antimicrobial capabilities, we look towards a non-toxic alternative that was used in previous studies as well. Essential oils such as lemon oil, oregano oil, and thyme oil have previously been used for great effect in antimicrobial and antioxidative applications. Now, something to note is that all three of these are very similar in terms of their molecular compositions. However, there are minor differences in how the chemicals are structured within these essential oils, and that actually impacts how they interact within these film systems. And that's most of the reason why we're testing them in this study, to see which form the most stable systems, which form the most antimicrobial, and which form the most mechanically sound. And lastly, in order to fit all of these systems in, because we've already covered all the antimicrobial agents, we're going to be using emulsions. Emulsions are basically mixtures of normally immiscible liquids, and you can imagine, say for example, oil and water. Oil, when added to water, will naturally separate from it, and that's because the oil wants to minimize the surface area in contact with the water due to the free energy presence within the entire thermodynamic system. But since emulsions automatically destabilize over time, and that's just by their nature, we can introduce emulsifier molecules to sort of orient themselves around oil droplets and disguise themselves as something that's water soluble, and this will prevent them from destabilizing as rapidly. And what's great about emulsions and why they're relevant right now is because we can use them to essentially package all of the antimicrobial agents that we mentioned previously. They can hold many hydrophilic and hydrophobic polymers by virtue of having both oil and water within the same solution. Albeit temporarily, but they can slowly release, and that's exactly what we want. And lastly, the last component I need to introduce you guys to is sulfur-lipid butyl ester, or SLBE. And if you want to imagine all the antimicrobial agents that I mentioned previously as materials held within a cardboard box, you can imagine SLB as sort of the tape that surrounds the cardboard box to make sure nothing falls out unnecessarily. It's the emulsifier molecule that we're using. It's water-soluble, food-safe, and it's also been previously shown to have antimicrobial capabilities, which is a nice bonus, and that's something that the lab that I worked at actually discovered on their own. And that leads me to the specific purpose of this study, which was to investigate the use of a bilayer film with these essential oils, oregano oil, lemon oil, and thyme oil, as well as the use of sulfur-lipid butyl ester, chitosan, and gamma polyglutamic acid in order to create these bilayer films. Now onto the methodology. So essentially what I did was I tested different types of oils, so that was oregano, thyme, or lemon, and I also tested different oil concentrations, because that would allow me to look at the mechanisms between the destabilization of these film systems, depending on how much oil is present, as well as the interaction of the film with other bacteria, other fungi, as a result of the presence of greater concentrations of oil. And also, I investigated the use of a bilayer emulsion composition in terms of either a pure chitosan bottom layer or an chitosan emulsion bottom layer. And those are the only differences between those two systems up there. Both of those systems incorporated a gamma polyglutamic acid emulsion top layer. In terms of the casting procedure, what you can imagine is I used a chitosan emulsion or solution, and I casted it onto a petri dish. Then I waited for 48 hours, and then I washed it with an AOH and DI water in order to remove any residual acetic acid that was used to dissolve the chitosan. Afterwards, the gamma PGA layer was introduced in order to make the bilayer, make the top layer. And the gamma PGA was either a pure solution or a gamma PGA emulsion, and that was added on top after the bottom layer was completely dry. And that would allow it to dry for 48 hours to create the actual film. Now, we need to talk about the tests that I used in order to see which films were more stable, which films were more antimicrobial, etc. In terms of stability, we looked at the emulsions that were used to form each of them, since if the emulsions destabilize, they'll start to leak the oil out of the film and destabilize the entire film. In terms of emulsion tests, I used bioimaging, microscopy, I analyzed the average droplet sizes, zeta potential, pH, and viscosity. And these are all general measurements of the emulsion stability, either macroscopic or microscopic. We'll only be looking at the average droplet size today, because if I went over all the data points from there, this would be a 3-hour presentation, but we'll cover the droplet size for today. In terms of film analyses, we also looked at the thickness of each of the films at 7 different locations. Also looked at the water solubility. We don't want a film that completely dissolves in water when in contact with any form of moisture. And we also don't want a film that is too hydrophilic, so that's why we're looking at the moisture content tests as well. In terms of the mechanical stability of the films, we looked at a DMA, so this is a dynamic mechanical analysis of each of the films. What's very important here to note are 3 different locations. First, the ultimate tensile strength, which is the maximum stress that each of the films was able to survive. And then there was the elongation at break, which is the maximum strain that each of the film was able to take. And then the Young's modulus, which basically is the change in the stress over the change in the strain at that early portion. And essentially what these measurements told us was that whether or not each of these films were more elastic, more tough, and whether or not they would survive actual applications. And lastly, for the tests, we looked at antimicrobial tests. So that was against a gram-positive bacteria, a fungus, and a gram-negative bacteria in B. cereus, C. tropicalis, and E. coli. And we tested these against each of the different film compositions to see which ones actually function. Now on to the results. Bear with me, there's a lot of data, but I'll have a summary at the end just in case. So with the emulsion droplet data, I mentioned that we were looking at the average droplet size. The droplet size is over there on the left side, and the oil concentration contained in the top layers of gamma, we see that it starts to gain antimicrobial capabilities against a gram-positive bacteria, which was more or less expected according to previous literature. What's interesting is that as we start adding the oils, we see that as we increase the concentrations, they start to first increase in terms of their antimicrobial capabilities throughout all the systems, meaning gram-positive, fungus, and gram-negative. However, as we get to the 10 weight percent oil systems, we see that start to drop off. We see that we don't have as much antimicrobial capabilities as we expected. And that's a bit of an issue because that indicates to us that we're trading the film stability in favor of theoretical antimicrobial capabilities, but that's actually not coming to fruition. And that indicates to us that the 5 weight percent oil systems are actually better for their antimicrobial capabilities. And we should be looking at those for the development of future films. Now here's the summary that I mentioned to go over basically what all that mess of data shows. First of all, the oregano oil emulsions appear better in terms of maintaining stability. They maintain lower droplet sizes, and the other data also indicated the same conclusion. Indicates that they have enough stability in order to prevent the destabilization of the overall film systems when compared to lemon oil or thyme oil. Also, we found that the bilayer films, when composed of a chitosan emulsion and a gamma-PGA emulsion, they tended to destabilize. They tended to form the hydrogel-like films that we saw previously, or they tended to increase the film thickness, which is not worth the trade-off in terms of water solubility. Also, we looked at the gamma-PGA bilayers with 5 weight percent oils, and they tended to have improved physical integrity when compared to the 1 weight percent and 10 weight percent oils. And also, when looking at the mechanical properties, the pure films tended to have very high ultimate tensile strengths, but 5 weight percent oregano oil and 5 weight percent lemon oil, as I mentioned previously, still remain competitive in terms of how much physical stress and strain they could take. And lastly, the 5 weight percent oregano oil films were working the best against gram-positive bacteria and fungi. They were actually functioning in terms of preventing the development of microbes. And the 5 weight percent thyme oil films also developed antimicrobial capabilities that were best against the gram-negative bacteria. And overall, that indicates that the systems with the best overall properties were 5 weight percent oregano oil systems, meaning a gamma-PGA emulsion top layer with 5 weight percent oregano oil, and a chitosan bottom layer that was pure. And the main takeaway from all of that is, instead of looking at the data specifically, we can show that a non-toxic sustainable food packaging film can be developed with these materials or with other materials, and we've shown that the potential for that is entirely present. It's applicable through bilayer films, and there are other methods for accomplishing that as well. So we don't have to use plastics such as BPA, that include BPA or PFOA, and we can actually use alternative materials that are just as effective and safer. In terms of future research, there's one other method that I alluded to previously that involves a co-acervation procedure, and that also has a lot of potential for developing a functioning film. And that just indicates that there's more research to be done in this field, and there's also more research to be done in terms of testing to prevent the deformations that we're seeing in some of the film systems. That could be changes to solution volume that were casted. We could also change the drying procedure to slow that down, or we can change the material of Petri dishes even, because the materials, say a plastic Petri dish, would be interacting differently with a casted film than, say, for example, a glass Petri dish. And lastly, in terms of acknowledgements, I'd like to thank the Great Neck Breast Cancer Coalition, especially Laura and Lisa, and also thank the team at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. That includes Dr. Gross, Missy Wang, and JQ. And I'd also like to thank everyone for coming to our presentation tonight. Thank you.
Question, how soon is it projected that this safer packaging will come into the marketplace?
I actually received the same question last year, but what's it called? So I gave an estimate that year about it was possibly within 10 or 20 years, and that actually seems to be rather accurate, because there's several papers that actually my research last year and my research this year contributed to the creation of several manuscripts in Dr. Gross's lab. There are many papers being developed on this as we speak, actually. And in terms of making these viable, it depends a lot on FDA approval, general public acceptance of it, marketability of it is also a factor. But I say that within 10 or 20 years is entirely possible for at least accomplishing the creation of a entirely viable film that can be commercially available.
Are they envisioning this film being sort of like a saran wrap film, or are they envisioning it as spray that goes directly onto the food to preserve it, like in the process?
So this film would essentially be dried onto the surface of anything. So these are relatively biocompatible chemicals. They're actually very non-toxic. So they can be dried immediately onto it. They don't need to be placed in any protective coating such as saran wrap.
So like in a farm setting, like when the produce is picked, it could be sprayed?
Yes, they can be used in like produce. They can be used in also applications in meat, like we saw in the previous study with with oregano oil and whey protein isolate films. And they can be used in a wide variety of applications.
What's chitosan?
So chitosan is actually I gotta scroll back a lot, but I'll explain while I scroll. Basically, chitosan is a biocompatible polymer that's actually developed using, do you know chitin? Chitin is basically what comprises the hard shells of a lot of exoskeletons for insects. If you treat that with a strong base, such as NaOH, you can form a polymer, such as chitosan, that has strong antimicrobial capabilities and has the properties that I discussed here.
Do you know how they taste?
Do I know how it tastes?
Yeah.
I haven't tried it in the lab. I don't think several health and safety regulations will have liked that. But I think that the scent isn't actually very strong. We chose thyme oil, lemon oil, and oregano oil because their scents can actually be masked relatively easily according to previous studies. So that's the main reason why we chose them. They're not very intrusive in terms of their scent or their flavor.
So do they think it could be used in the home to be sprayed directly on vegetables or fruits in the home to keep it?
Okay, so the question was whether or not it could be sprayed directly on the film, directly in the home. It depends on how far the research progresses, because once again, you have to account for the fact that these need to be dried on the surface of these. But I believe it could be applied in that range, yeah.
So is the idea that these things are going to be eaten, like similar to how certain waxes are put on cucumbers? Or is it something that we're expected to totally take off before eating? I'm curious where the chitosan comes from, if it's really from.
Well, these can be consumed actually. They're forming films that are rather thin. They're in the range of nanometers. And so these wouldn't be intrusive in terms of consuming them. They would mainly serve an antimicrobial purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Thank you to all the students. They were just spectacular. I wanted to also announce that while this was all going on, Senator Anna Kaplan came in with Sabra, her legislative assistant, Sabra Samet. And so we're so grateful that you're here. And we're going to now, there's some proclamations that the legislators want to deliver to the students. So,
thank you. And I want to thank Lisa and Laura. Thank you very much, Laura, for always including me and letting me come and meet some of our wonderful students.
I want Laura to do the picture.
So we're going to actually keep the kids in the middle because they are the stars.
Absolutely. There we go. Thank you.
So are you all seniors?
Junior. Rising junior.
You're a senior because you were here last.
Mother did die of breast cancer, so I was quite young. There were 4 children in the family, and for years I've been trying to follow and read of all the advances that are going on. And even though that happened 40 years ago, you know, we're making very slow progress. So I like to hear about these projects and hope that in my lifetime they will be a reality, especially the study at Columbia that you were mentioning, that you're studying, you know, daughters of mothers and tracing them and keeping studies going on. So it's such important work that you're doing, and I really salute and applaud you for everything you do, and keep up the great work. So, let me just see Timothy. Raymond. Rebecca. Not Stella, but that's your real name. Okay, so let me see what you get.
Lisa, for making this possible and for really choosing these students and helping make this a reality. What we saw today was so much knowledge and maturity, eloquence and passion, right? It was just astounding. So congratulations to all of you. Congratulations to the parents, right, who have raised tremendous children. And as Senator Kaplan said, may they continue to be a blessing. The town of North Hempstead, I wanted to just read what this says a little bit. It says, whereas the town of North Hempstead is justly proud of its outstanding citizens and individuals who have exhibited a sense of dedication and concern for their community. And that it proclaims that Tuesday, the 3rd of September, be declared a day of special recognition throughout the town of North Hempstead for each of you for being honored at the GNBCC Students and Scientists Research Program presentation. So congratulations. So Rebecca.
You're an honorary town of North Hempstead first.
Timothy, it's just, we don't do this every day. Okay. Okay, so take a picture. Yes.